Welcome to the House chamber for this meeting today. We appreciate all of you coming. Today we are going to be discussing nuclear development in our state, and we have a list of some folks who are going to come and present to this committee. We'd like to start with Ed McGinnis with Curio, and anyone that you want to bring to the table with you. Welcome to the state capitol, and we're glad to have you here, sir. Let me get you hot. Go ahead.
Mic on, clear? Yes, great to be here, not just because I grew up in Metairie and Kenner, even though I've been in Washington, D.C. for a better part of 30-plus years. I owe it to the great state of Louisiana, not least of which Louisiana Board of Education sent me to France. Try and brush up on my French so I can speak with Representative Carrier and others. So thank you very much for your time. So I am honored to be here. The Joint Committee, kudos to you all for focusing on such a key energy sector, nuclear. We're in a world now, especially with the new sheriff in town, full utilization, maximum utilization of our resources, all of the above approach. And I agree with that approach. And nuclear is part of that. Nuclear as a sector, though, has been static, if you will, for generations or for decades, certainly. But we have a bow wave of companies bringing in a full suite of new nuclear technologies. My company, I'm proud to say, is part of that bow wave. Essentially, our company is focused on three of the most important components of nuclear. Of course, Louisiana has two very well-run nuclear power plants in Waterford and River Bend. But what we do know is that you have three key pieces of any state that is utilizing nuclear or thinking about deploying nuclear. One is the reactors themselves, right? And we have the oldest average fleet in the world. And we have the largest nuclear fleet in the world, but also the oldest. We also need, any user of nuclear, you need fuel. Reactors, fuel, and then what are you going to do with the so-called waste? And I'm here to talk to you about how that so-called waste is anything but waste. It's a $1 trillion resource asset sitting there waiting to be tapped, but we've sidelined it over the years due to government policies. So our company, as I indicated, we're in the process of deploying a state-of-the-art advanced nuclear reactors, small modular reactor and a micro reactor, among others. We're also in the process of deploying advanced nuclear recycling, so we don't have to throw this valuable resource away. And by recycling it, you're actually reducing to about 3 to 4% with our process of the original high-level radioactive material, and then extracting the valuable isotopes and other materials that are in their precious metals. For example, in the United States, with the largest nuclear sector in the world, we still have the largest number, 94 reactors operating. China's hot on our heels. But what we have, due to government policies, we have an accumulation of over 90,000 metric tons of used nuclear fuel. Used nuclear fuel, what do we mean by that in the United States? That's when you have fresh nuclear fuel based on uranium dug out of the ground and then enriched, and then you put it, for example, Entergy puts it in River Bend. It's run typically for about 5 years. When it's in that reactor fissioning for about 5 years, then it's pulled out. Once it's pulled out, it may be at a very high level of radiotoxicity. However, it has only used about 4% of the original energy value in that used nuclear fuel. That's why my company is focused on being able to tap the full resources and not try and throw away 96%, like buying a Ferrari and then filling it up for gas, and after the first tank, throwing it away. It makes no sense. So we want to unlock the full potential of the nuclear sector in the U.S., depending on the stats you see, probably about $150 billion market. We believe this is a $1 trillion market ready to be unlocked. There is so much energy value still sitting at the pads next to reactors around the country to meet all of the U.S. electricity needs for the next 150 years. That includes EVs and AI centers coming online. And that's not me. This is Idaho National Lab and some of our world-class scientists that have made these statements very publicly. So we've got a tremendous resource, and we are in the process, our company, of engaging with states to determine the best location for deploying our backbone technology of our what we call new cycle, and this is this state-of-the-art recycling process. It's unlike the way way fuel is being reprocessed around the world today, which is only being done by a few countries, and they're state-owned. So Russia, Japan, France, China, but they use a very, very old arcane process, including using a nitric acid process to dissolve the fuel assemblies and to try and get to those valuable isotopes. By doing that, you actually create more waste than you started from. We came up with a design, partnered with the U.S. Department of Energy right now, where we're in the process of lab-scale demoing it, to be able to recycle it with eliminating the nitric acid process, that it's a dry, superheated process. And by doing that, we're able to reduce to about 3 to 4% of the original waste, high-level radioactive material. With that exponential decrease in high-level radioactive material, we're able to dispose of that in a much easier way, 12,000 feet in the ground, for example, in 4 12-inch standard industry boreholes, for example. And at the same time, this is going to be a tech corridor, because this recycling facility, and as you can see with our new cycle facility, we're going to be pulling out we'll process about 4,000 metric tons a year. That'll be the highest processing facility in the world. But it makes sense because we have the largest nuclear fleet in the world. That means we have the largest amount of sideline used nuclear fuel waiting to be tapped, waiting to get to that full resource utilization. And only because of government policies over the years have we not done that, going back to Carter and international security reasons. But we're in a different day now. Nuclear we have bipartisan support in this country for nuclear, and an all-time high for public support. So whether it's to deal with energy security, geostrategic, or whether it's combating climate change, you name it, nuclear has a central role. But if you don't solve the so-called nuclear waste problem, our company believes that we're never going to get nuclear on a footing where it's on a growth footing, much less an exponential growth footing, which is what we're seeing some of the supporters wanting to see. So our facility, wherever we build it, and we're talking to a number of states right now, Utah, Arkansas, a number of others, that facility will become the single largest clean fuel producer on the planet at 4,000 metric tons. That will make whatever state hosts this facility be the cleanest fuel producer on the planet just through this facility. We have about a 7-year timeline on getting to full commercial. We're scaling it up earlier on. So we're going to be pulling out not only reused fuel to be able to go right back into reactors, whether it's Riverbend or Waterford or others. We have partnerships with some of the largest U.S. utilities to precisely look at the feasibility of recycling the fuel that's sitting on the pads right now, stranded essentially, and then recycle it for fuel to go right back into the reactor. And then by doing that, reducing down to 3 to 4% the original waste. I call it a win-win-win, and that's what we're about in our business. So in addition to the uranium-based fuel that we will offtake, we'll have enough to provide about 30% of the U.S. nuclear fuel requirements. We're going to offtake plutonium, and plutonium is a far superior fuel density of power, lower weight ratio. You can get a reactor that's a third the size of a uranium-based fuel. The only problem is where you're going to get the plutonium. It's essentially man-made. It comes from the uranium fission process when it's in that reactor for 5 years. If you're not recycling, you're not getting access to that plutonium. So that plutonium with the security blanket wrapped around it, which is our process, we call it true fuel. We have these 2 reactors going to run off that fuel, and our company will provide, again, the reactor, the fuel, and the waste management disposition. No one's doing that in the U.S. and virtually no one around the world. In addition to the uranium fuel and the plutonium-based fuel we'll be off-taking, there are a number of other valuable isotopes we're going to off-take. We already have off-take agreements with medical, industrial, space. And a lot of people don't realize there are precious metals in this used nuclear fuel. During that 5-year fissioning process, there is rhodium, for example, and palladium, some of the most expensive metals in the world at large volumes. We're essentially going to be a waste disposition company and a mining operation, mining all the valuable materials that are still there, creating a tech corridor. Our facility, we anticipate, will hire this is real quick, the timeline, and I can go through that a little bit later. Scaling up, working with the national labs. But for our facility will be job intensive and trades-based job intensive, which I'm particularly proud of. Growing up in New Orleans, very blue-collar neighborhoods, certainly where I grew up, and our facility, when we build this facility in the next 5 to 7 years, it is going to employ well over 3,000 employees, generational jobs, most of them trades-based. Most people don't realize nuclear operating facilities, even nuclear reactors, the majority of the employees are trades-based. They're not advanced degrees. You need those too, but the majority are not, and they're highly paid. Average for the nuclear industry for a facility like ours is going to range between $80,000 and $130,000 to $140,000 a year. Think about that. For high school or 2-year associate's degrees, highly trained, you've got facilities that are that will be intended to operate for 60 or more years. Those are generational jobs and a backbone of a tech corridor. Again, we're particularly proud of that, and we're very stakeholder-based. Wherever this facility goes, it'll be owned as much by the community residents as any company, because this is a long-term backbone for that region, and we strongly believe in that. That's why our business model, we have no plans to ever ask for tax abatements. In fact, we want to proudly contribute with full tax return from our facility. We estimate with a $5 to $7 billion facility revenue a year that we will generate about over $400 million in direct tax revenue, and also a much larger amount when you look at the downstream the chain. So we also have a number of world-class partners. Our biggest partner, I would say, again, is the United States government's world-leading national labs. We have 4 national labs that are partnered with us, and we're in the process in an accelerated way demonstrating this advanced, much more environmentally friendly and economically robust private-led recycling technology, NewCycle. We just entered into a major agreement with Orano, one of the largest nuclear companies in the world. They're in the process of building an $8 billion enrichment facility or so in Tennessee. Governor Lee and others have lauded that effort. We're partnered with Orano, and we're proud to be a partner where we will recycle and be the lead for the recycling, even though worldwide, Orano is the largest recycler in the world in France, but they have intentionally chosen to partner with us as the lead for recycling in the United States, the biggest market in the world. And when we recycle, the plan is to provide them with feedstock for their enrichment facility in Tennessee. Why is enrichment important? Because right now, the United States has allowed our nuclear fuel cycle infrastructure to deteriorate so much. We went from the world leader on nuclear to literally today, we still are 100%, virtually 100% dependent on foreign supplied nuclear fuel. Think about that. Almost 20% of our electricity is from nuclear, 18 plus. And so all of that fuel is coming from foreign suppliers, albeit one facility in New Mexico that is European owned. But it is time for us to increase the enrichment capacity and reconstitute a fully functioning fuel cycle so states like Louisiana can confidently access nuclear and know that there's tech out there to address all the 3 components, like I said, reactors, fuel, and recycling. So we have partners in the key supply chains, as you can see, construction, et cetera. And again, this is our ecosystem for tech. We're end to end. There's no other company like that, certainly in the Western market. Every company is specialized. Bill Gates' TerraPower reactors, Sam Altman's micro reactors. Then you have Holtec for storage. You've got different fuel supply companies. We're coming in to completely disrupt, to make it as easy as possible and to de-risk as much as possible for customers and states who want to access nuclear, but not in a Faustian bargain way where you go with a nuclear reactor, but you have to tell your residents you don't really have a plan for the nuclear waste other than waiting for the federal government to pick it up, and we know how that story has gone. So we want to be that common sense, economically robust way to let the private sector come in, partnered with the government, and offer the full suite of services so you don't have to make a Machiavellian choice. You go with a nuclear reactor, you can even have in-state fuel supply and in-state waste mitigation and also commodity extraction. So I am going to just wrap it up with this slide talking about Louisiana's position. In our view, Louisiana is extraordinarily well positioned to not only be a leader in nuclear, but more all of the above for nuclear. The infrastructure you have, the transportation corridors, the thoughtfulness of this joint committee, shining light on this all of the above approach, including nuclear. You've got 2 well-run reactors under Entergy. So you have a good history, good knowledge base, but now we have a completely new bow wave of nuclear tech options to come in. You have data centers coming in here, huge power consumers. You've got Bitcoin, others, and they're all starting to focus on nuclear, rightfully so. So our view is our company wants to be that option or that pathway where you can provide both competitive electricity for the residents and also increase access for new economic drivers for the state, accessing power, but not at the expense of price for residents. And you can do it, small modular reactors, recycling approach, secure fuel supply, waste mitigation. The good news is the tech and industry, and our company in particular, we're there and we're ready to help crack open that nuclear market in a way we haven't done and to provide that option for accessing nuclear where we don't have to make that Machiavellian choice of not being sure what to do with the fuel or having somewhat of a fragile nuclear fuel supply. We will be able to provide all that, and we're proud of that. So I will conclude my remarks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, and we do have questions. Thank you for that presentation. I have a quick one. On the slide that showed the number of jobs, 3,200 and something.
Yes.
Is that for each facility, or is that just in the scope of everything related to nuclear, or is that for each facility?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is for this one facility.
Wow.
To give you a sense of how different a recycling facility is jobs-wise to a nuclear reactor perhaps 500 to 700 people direct. La Hague, the largest reprocessing plant in the world, albeit with a very arcane technology, they employ between 8 to 10,000 people full-time for the life of that facility. We're more compact, proudly, more efficient, but we will be directly employing well over 3,000 and at least equal that number downstream, because we're going to have co-located with our recycling companies that are off-taking medical isotopes, companies off-taking for industrial, well logging devices, et cetera, space-based, and national security.
Okay, great. And those those starting jobs or average job salaries are, quite impressive as well.
They are.
So,
the nuclear industry, as I'm sure you know, with Waterford and Riverbend, they not only employ a large number of trades base, but relatively speaking, some of the highest average salaries of any energy market.
And I think I heard you say this, and I don't want to box you in or put you on the spot, but did you say that you would not be asking for any ITEP or any other tax
Our
abatement.
business model allows for us not to ask for that because we're confident that our commodity extraction business is robust. We are diversified because, unlike most companies, we have at least 10 different revenue streams, from waste collection to commodity extraction from the used nuclear fuel that's been treated as waste, fuel supply, and our reactors. So we're confident that once we're at the point where we're building and we have that facility operating, our most important sort of de-risker is knowing where we're going to site it. So siting is very important. Early communication with the community is extremely important, and we believe in that. Early, often, and frequently, because they're the partners wherever this facility is going to be sited.
I agree with you. I hope the other energy areas of energy would follow that lead of what you just said. So a few questions, and thank you very much. Vice Chair Orgeron for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. McGinnis. I know, academically, I got a bit of education in regular first-generation nuclear reactor power generation.
Well, that says a lot because I hear you have a pretty sharp mind.
But you kind of jumped over a lot of technology advancements from going from what the vast majority of the audience understands to be nuclear power generation. And you just jumped over the small modular nuclear reactors that that have new technologies of walk-away safety, smaller, 250, 300 megawatts done in silos that you might have 12 or 16 of them to generate as much as a standard traditional nuclear power plant would, all based on a lot of technology I would imagine from nuclear submarine technology, aircraft carrier from the Navy, and you went straight to what I would call your micro reactor, basically taking like not so much focusing on energy generation, but it being there, high temperature pressure for industrial manufacturing, but basically cracking the waste product of the previous generations fuel waste, and basically refining it into better fuel for some of those mid-generation small modulars, as well as pulling out all these rare minerals that could be found from there. One of the questions I have is you mentioned a HOPE reactor. Is that just the brand name for y'all, or is it an acronym specific thing?
Yes, it is an acronym. Thank you very much. I did spend a majority of the time on our recycling technology because that's how we're going to penetrate the market. But make no mistake, we have two advanced reactors at least. One is a small modular reactor that's designed to be scaled up to a full size. I've got it on my screen. Oh, there we go. So our HOPE reactor, anybody who likes to geek out, the homogeneous plutonium eliminating reactor. The bottom line is, I had mentioned there's two types of reactors. Fuel, right? Uranium, which is all of the reactors in this country is powered by uranium. And then you have plutonium. Plutonium is a higher density power fuel, and it is less weight. So you have lower weight ratio, higher density power in plutonium. So actually, a plutonium reactor, you build the reactor with our design, which is a plutonium-based fuel called True Fuel, is going to be probably about a third the size of a uranium-based reactor. That gives you tremendous advantages economically, distribution, siting, and otherwise you can see the size differential. So that's part of our integrated strategy, that we are going to do all of the above. The reactor, we're going to have the fuel, we're going to have the higher density fuel. Why aren't we using plutonium right now? I worked first half of my career in nuclear nonproliferation, and there was a saying, thou shalt never have a plutonium-based civilian nuclear fuel supply cycle. And it's because of the concerns of the dual-use nature of plutonium. We believe we've addressed that. And we have our plutonium, when we pull it out, the way it's being done around the world in France and others, it's called Purex, and they literally pull out a pure stream of plutonium. That's what led President Carter in putting a moratorium or a ban on reprocessing, because it had too much of a Trojan horse for bad actors to be able to use that civilian reprocessing for weapons development. We have solved that, we believe, because we never pull out pure stream of plutonium. We do it where it's interlaced with other self-protecting isotopes as part of that fuel, but it doesn't affect the neutronics performance of that fuel. So this reactor is absolutely, sir, an electricity generator. We're going for price competitiveness of natural gas, but it's also a multi-purpose reactor. Electricity, also high process heat. This is a molten salt reactor. It's walk-away safe. If you had loss of power when that reactor is operating, no human intervention. It's going to shut down safely on its own. So you've got electricity generation in this reactor through the fast spectrum core, and then we have a thermal spectrum in the outer ring that is going to produce isotopes that we'll be able to harvest, and then finally process heat. We're talking to a couple of major refinery companies in oil and gas because they're interested in our high process heat, where we have an offtake of about 750 C. So that's good quality process heat. But this is a multi-purpose reactor, and we're trying to meet the needs of the customers and not just rely on reactors that are really 40, 50-year vintage tech.
I saw that you had walk-away safe low-pressure operation, and the low-pressure operation made me was going to ask if it was molten salt. I think there was an article that I read probably about a week ago that says, the big question is why it took 21 years to get a regulatory approval to build the first molten salt reactor.
Oh, yeah.
So, I don't know if that's your company or another company that's actually gotten that approval to build the first one. Sounded like it was someone else, but a test reactor.
Yeah. Well, in Washington, D.C., having worked 30 years in government there, sometimes I like to explain to, common sense folks in different states that sometimes it's a logic-free zone there. And some of the things that we've done in the nuclear sector in the past have been almost logic-free, such as the molten salt reactor. We pioneered that in the 1950s by the famous Dr. Alvin Weinberg, who was part of the Manhattan Project, and he's largely considered the father of the current reactor pressurized PWR reactors. But he also is the father of this molten salt reactor. They actually demonstrated a molten salt reactor at Oak Ridge National Lab. So we know how to do this. We're taking this tech, though, and we're taking the latest and greatest in modularity and versatility and designing it for market demand. So I would say that why haven't we seen it? It's largely a function of government policies, the market structure, and at the end of the day, who are the ones that are owning the reactors and deciding whether to buy new ones? Generally, they're utilities. So you look at the market, you look at the structure. We've had almost no new builds for decades. Vogel in Georgia, first in decades, built from the beginning to end. And so this market is ready to be cracked open because the government policies are finally adjusting to allow companies like mine to come in and do what we do best, and that is develop innovative, cost-effective tech that is designed to meet the customer needs. There is a need to deal with the so-called waste. There is a need for a secure fuel supply. There is a need for carbon-free electricity in combination with all of the above, the fossil industry, and all. There's room for all of us. We're going to need all of us to be able to meet the growing demands, whether it's AI data centers and others. So why we took so long to start and not and fall off, go in the ditch a little bit, whether it was Fukushima and other events. We have this moment now to really put nuclear back as a major growing contributor in a way where we deal with those issues that we treated like elephants in the room, like nuclear waste, which is anything but waste. It's a treasure trove of resources ready to be tapped. And then you get a twofer by reducing the waste. And then you get, as important as anything else, reactors like ours that is going to be fueled by the recycled waste.
Yeah, it's just technology is so significantly different from traditional nuclear power plants or nuclear reactors. One last question is, after in your microreactor, taking waste fuels, creating high temperature pressure for industrial processes, some spare energy, mining out every valuable rare earth minerals that's in it, you've done all of that. How much and what is the final waste product? I think you had once talked about core disposals or something like that. Can you elaborate more on, for us on the committee, exactly what's the final product, the final waste product that you can't do anything more with, and what you're going to do with it?
So the final product we call the waste stream, the output after you've recycled. So we have this recycling facility. We will have the size of a large football field, let's say, NFL football stadium. The outputs are going to come out. We're going to first extract. We've got these fuel assemblies, right? 17 feet tall, whatever can come out of Riverbend and others. Goes into our system, our modular system, full-length rods. After we first start pulling out isotopes that otherwise would have to be thrown away and treated as waste. Some of them are high-emitting isotopes, but very needed space-based power sources, fighting cancer, et cetera. We're going to pull, the first stream is all of those 10 or so isotopes that we're going to pull out, uranium, feedstock for fuel, plutonium, et cetera, precious metals. And so we're going to pull all that out. Second, we're going to separate out the low-level waste stream. Low-level waste is exponentially easier to deal with and is disposed of every day in our country. I was in Utah speaking in Salt Lake City, a joint committee similar to this. They're thinking seriously about going nuclear, and they want that comprehensive fuel cycle approach. And they have a leading low-level waste company called Energy Solutions in their state. And so they take low-level waste all the time. So when we have the outputs out of our facility will be the isotopes that go into the market, then low-level stream that's going to be separated from the remaining high-level radioactive material. The high-level radioactive material is the material that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission requires to be permanently geologically disposed of. So one of our options is if you only have 3 to 4% of the original high-level radioactive material left, one option is easily to put it in a borehole. We drill every day in this country. We know how to do it. Standard 12-inch diameter, standard boreholes. The Department of Energy is funding borehole disposal companies now. And so we could probably put all of the remaining 3 to 4% of that high-level radioactive material in just 4 to 8 boreholes, 12,000 feet in the ground, below any aquifer or any other area that you would need to be able to tap. Put that in there and never see it again. The last key point is if you don't recycle this material, and I talked about logic-free zones, if you don't recycle this material, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission requires a safety standard for 10,000 years. That is impossible to wrap your mind around. It's civilization as we know it, perhaps. 10,000 years, you're going to be required to make sure the material sitting at Riverbend secure in a deep geologic configuration. We recycle that material, reduce that risk, 3 to 4%. We can still put it in a deep geologic configuration, and it will only last for about 300 years before it's safe for people to be around. 300 years sounds like a lot, but compared to the 10,000 year and even a million year requirement, that's a no-brainer as well. So like I said, as a company, we're looking for solutions that make sense and that really minimizes any negative impact on communities and maximizes the benefit, whether it's no tax abatement, whether it is the the jobs that will be generational. So that's why I left government. I was there 30 years, my last major job at the White House under President Trump. And serendipitously, I met the founder of my company. He had this vision, and it took him 2 years to come up with a vision. It took me 30 years to realize this is the way to go. A comprehensive solution on nuclear back-end waste and reactors that are fueled by that so-called waste, and the fuel supply comes with it.
Make sure you any of those core disposals are done in igneous and metamorphic structures, so that we're not back here, looking for stranded minerals underneath your cores. So.
That's a very good point. And so there's some locations that may be more suitable for a 12,000 feet disposal than others. You probably go deeper than that. But at the end of the day, the U.S. government, the Department of Energy, does have that legal responsibility to be able to take back that high level of radioactive material. But we're doing a great service to the taxpayer if the federal government only has to take back 3 to 4% of the original waste, as opposed to 100+%. And we see the fights going on with Nevada and Yucca Mountain because of the volumes and where you're going to put it.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis. That's all I have right now, there, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairperson Ron. Representative Curio, did you have a question or not?
He answered it pretty much. There's a lot of, you got me?
All right, go ahead.
A lot of smart people in this room, and I ain't one of them. But look,
You're just humble.
go over the nuclear
You
waste.
wouldn't be here if you weren't smart.
Yeah, the nuclear waste thing. Where would these holes be aboard? I mean, like, who would determine where?
It can be determined by a private company with a state and local community. At the end of the day, it would need to be licensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and there would need to be a contract agreement involving the Department of Energy. But at the end of the day, whether it's private companies, that utilities, right now, they are the owner that use nuclear fuel, that so-called waste, because it's sitting at their pads. Yes, next to the reactor. Yes, they have an agreement for the Department of Energy to pick it up. That's why they taxed residents, including from Louisiana, to the tune of now almost $50 billion, including interest that's accumulated in the Nuclear Waste Fund in Washington, D.C. And that was a tax in order to pay for the government to remove that used nuclear fuel that's sitting in Waterford and in Riverbend that has not been removed. So they were supposed to start removing that material after taxing everybody for decades in 1997. They failed to do it. The utilities came together and brought the federal government to court. And under Obama, they finally prevailed, and they won. And so now it's called the Judgment Fund, where the federal government, and I'm sure DOJ will probably be noticing this as well, the federal government pays nearly $1 billion a year in court-assessed fines to the utilities as compensatory damage for taxing the residents but not delivering a service. So where it's going to be, it can be where that final repository can be cited pretty much wherever we and our law allows. Right now, that one piece of legislation that prevents this full fuel cycle vision is the country's law right now says that final 3-4%, let's say, or if it's unrecycled, full 100, the permanent geologic disposal needs to be at Yucca Mountain. But we've seen both parties say that's politically unworkable, and most people believe it's only a question of time before that's adjusted to allow some common sense industry-led approach. But during the meantime, interim storage could be a very long time. And so interim storage is allowed. It's just, and we could do it commercially. We can do, cut a contract with, for example, Entergy with DOE's, involvement for disposal right now. Holtec is a company attempting to site a facility like that in New Mexico. My problem with that is it doesn't ensure and offer a plan for the residents to make sure that if it's interim storage, that it doesn't end up becoming de facto a permanent stranded set of materials. So if we recycle it, we reduce it down to about 3-4% of the waste, then we have options that we never had before, as opposed to trying to just force one state who doesn't want it in Nevada, and in an unrecycled way. I have to say, I'm not sure if I would want it if it's not recycled, because there's so much value, and it's a win-win-win because you can reduce it down to 3-4%.
Thank you.
I said I gave you more of an answer.
Want to break it down for me, but thank you very much.
We'll put it together on an index card for you. And Senator Allen for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McGinnis, and this can be a brief answer if you'd like, in the interest of time. Safety speaking, how safe is this? And on the safety side and the placement side, does Louisiana fit for this placement? Do these need to go in uninhabited areas? Where is a good place, and what's the overall safety if they did have a failure? Is there a redundancy system built into that?
So our reactor is walk-away safe, and it's designed to be able to operate within up to the fence line. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has already granted a license for a small modular reactor at the fence line, as opposed to a 10-mile emergency zone evacuation, which has been the case for the large reactors. So that's on the reactor. And for our recycling facility, it will not be a pressurized system, nor is our reactor, though. And it's going to be highly safe. It is not a reactor, it's chemistry. We know industry chemistry in Louisiana. And so the only thing that the biggest driver for our recycling facility will probably be security perimeter. But both of those can be distributed and sited throughout the state. And yes, Louisiana, I think, would be a very attractive option for deploying a tech corridor like I've described.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis. And if you've never been to Senate District 21, love to have you down and show you the property. Got some good property picked out for you. Thank you.
Be my pleasure. Thank you.
Right by that solar farm. Right by the solar farm.
We're all of the above. We get along with everybody.
So do we sometimes. Representative Landry for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McGinnis, I actually heard you speak in Arkansas, but I was rushed and they wouldn't let me stay as long as I wanted to. But I do want to ask, I am intrigued by minimizing waste, because that's one of my businesses I do in the oil and gas industry. My biggest concern is following the waste stream. In a lot of instances, states call cradle to grave. So let's say in this state, Entergy has their waste and they're responsible for it through some kind of agreement with the federal government, correct?
Right. Yes, that's correct right now.
So let's say you would take their waste and maximize its potential, and then you have the remaining 2%.
3-4%.
Yeah. Is that now your waste, or who does that waste still belong to?
I would say there's options. So it depends on the state. We've engaged with a lot of states. Right now, if there's no change to the law, that 3-4% would still be the responsibility of the U.S. government to retrieve using the Nuclear Waste Fund, right? But until that title is transferred, and the title of that waste is not transferred to the Department of Energy until they pick it up, right? And so they were supposed to start picking up in 1997. So, and they're nowhere close to picking it up now. So for all intents and purposes, right now, legally, that fuel is owned by the utility. And that means that fuel is there in the community, the used nuclear fuel. And if unrecycled, then it is technically waste. But it's following the streams is following the title, right, as you know. And so right now the title is with, and the ownership is with the utility. And that's the case throughout the country. And that's part of the rub. And that's part of frankly, our business opportunity, because we want to be a solutions-based company, and part of it is this material is going nowhere fast. The Department of Energy is nowhere close. I ran the programs. I know I have tire tracks on my back. And so still, at the same time, if you reduce it down to 3 to 4% that the federal government picks up, I call that a huge benefit to the American taxpayer. We did our own calculations. I've seen calculations of the cost difference between a Yucca Mountain where you don't recycle it, where you'll probably need 3 Yucca Mountains, and as opposed to 3-4% where you're just talking perhaps 4 or 8 boreholes, and then the rest goes in product streams, and then low level you can dispose of at facilities now. So you've got the price difference. I've seen over $1 trillion for if you're going to not recycle it. Where are we going to come up with $1 million before the federal government starts even picking up the used nuclear fuel sitting at the sites? So we're a solution, not waiting. I think the worst thing that I could ever say is it's the government's problem. No, it isn't. The used nuclear fuel is sitting in the communities right now. So it is not the government's problem when they fail to pick it up. So we want to solve that problem. And if you have it down to 3 to 4%, I'm confident the federal government can figure out a way to find 4 to 8 boreholes somewhere that's suitable, in my humble opinion.
Thank you. My next question is, how would this be transported? How would we move it throughout the state corridor like you're talking about?
3 ways it's transported, used nuclear fuel: water or rail or road, highway. Either one, all 3 have been done. So you've got options. And so in the nuclear business for transportation, I think when the individual says good infrastructure for transportation, that means you pretty much have all 3. And certainly Louisiana has all 3. I would say that used nuclear fuel itself, when it's shipped, oftentimes it's over water. For example, France, they reprocess, and they reprocess Japan's used nuclear fuel. And so by ship, very efficient. I would argue that's the most efficient way to transport. And of course, we have a highly regulated spent fuel canisters that are tested in virtually every attempted destruction environment. So I'm very confident that the material can be transported very safely, and it's done every day in this country.
But it is actually a hazardous material, correct?
Absolutely. It's hazardous, especially if you don't recycle it, because then it's commingled with, when it comes out of that reactor after 5 years, it's commingled with low-level, high-level, and other elements. And so that high-level material, which is a much smaller amount, really interacts with the rest in creating all of that much larger amount of waste. If you recycle it like us, we're not only extracting products, but we're separating out the most difficult, highly radioactive material from the low emitters and the other isotopes that can be used in society. That's essentially part of our approach. Separate it out, not unlike recycling in many other industries. And you get the most difficult materials out, isolated, and then put the rest either to work or handle it in a different manner.
And, like I said, I think minimizing waste is something that as all Americans should look at, from your household waste to any kind of industry that produces waste. How close would you actually locate to a reactor that's already in existence? Is that something in a business model, or is that something you try to put yourself in your own realm, or try to locate close to the power generator to where you could sell the power? Or
we could easily relocate or co-locate with a reactor. In fact, our plans will include, even if it's just with our reactor and our recycling, we could have the co-location of the reactor with the recycling. We're in advanced discussions. We have an agreement, actually, with one utility. I can say it publicly, Washington State Energy Northwest, and they have the only nuclear reactor in the northwest of the United States, and that is Columbia Generating Station. They have over 2,000 metric tons of used nuclear fuel stranded because the federal government has not picked it up, sitting in a patch. Right across the road is Hanford, and they have some really good nuclear infrastructure. And so we're looking at potentially siting our recycling facility right across the road. So your point about transportation is a very good point, because co-locating a recycling facility next to the reactor itself that's generating that used nuclear fuel could be the optimized option.
And So nuclear is something that I think we all need to be educated on. I've even heard some talks about possibly on lands in New Mexico and West Texas of possibly storing it above ground. I know that has nothing to do with Louisiana, but it is still a waste that they're trying to get rid of.
Well, I want to say Senator Cruz, for example, I've had the pleasure to work with him very closely. He sponsored legislation along with Senator Heinrich from New Mexico, bipartisan effort. And their point is they don't want that interim storage in their state without a final solution. So the plans for used nuclear fuel or interim storage, for example, in Texas and the Permian, or in the broader Permian right across the state line in New Mexico, I think that's the biggest factor, that they have companies that were planning or thinking about building interim storage in those locations. And frankly, I don't think any state talks to my company if I'm in interim storage business, because I'm not offering a solution for the long-term nuclear waste. Our business is offered the comprehensive. There is industry out there that is just pushing for interim storage. That's a difficult one because the risks of having that material become stranded because the federal government is not going to pick it up. I can't blame people for being concerned about it. So again, we're offering a long-term, comprehensive, sustainable approach, including that. Those are apples and oranges compared to New Mexico and Texas, where that they want recycling, maybe not in the Permian, but the Senator Heinrich and Cruz legislation is supporting looking at recycling and not just trying to have a half solution through interim storage.
No, Mr. McManus, I appreciate that because I think at the end of the day, your organization, if this can progress into something that we see the first reactor, like I said, I think minimizing our waste is key, and not only the future of nuclear, which nuclear is already there. It's just I think there's a lot of things that's happened in the past that kind of have people scratching their head. But hopefully we need that amount of power generated in the years to come. So thank you for presenting today.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Representative Landry. Representative Zarang for a question.
No. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. McGinnis, thank you for being here. I think you probably answered it, not directly, but there's no doubt there's a lot of positive benefits to expanding nuclear energy and engaging in a lot more within the country. But in looking at the number of nuclear power plants, and you referenced the fact that we don't have, I think we have 3 that have gone online in the last decade, and we have 3 times as many that have gone offline. I think
Right.
went from a high of 111 to now we have like 92 or whatever, I don't know the exact
94.
number. 94. So in your experience, obviously, you know, people often cite, you know, the concerns with Chernobyl, you know, Fukushima, and the other potential scares that they've had, but also costs associated with it, but also permitting. What is the major roadblock or impediment in terms of advancing nuclear?
So, you know, just a little corollary, I would say that space industry, when SpaceX came onto the scene, where NASA and others, they had lost their innovative edge. They were nowhere near on a growth pattern, lost the space shuttle program, and the industry was in great trouble, I would say. Reusable rockets come on the scene, and it changed everything. My point is, for the nuclear sector, we have been on a glide path of exit for many reasons, government policies, et cetera, on nuclear. Like you said, only 3-4 reactors in the past couple of decades. We are on an exit path. Even right now, our industry will exit if we don't do something to bring larger numbers of reactors. And if to bring reactors, first of all, is to bring new tech in and have the regulatory process allow companies like us to bring innovative tech in the market. The regulatory body has become the national, very risk averse. They were based on safety and security. they just changed their mission statement since January 20 to say they are also, their mission statement is to enable nuclear industry in a safe and secure way. That's a big departure. I think what we have is a sea change in the attitude of nuclear. First time in my lifetime, a majority of Americans support nuclear, see it positively. First time in my lifetime, we have strong bipartisan support for nuclear, yes, for different reasons. A lot of the function, sir, of why nuclear has not been on a growth or even sustainable path is socio-political and perception. And I don't blame the public for being worried. But I put the onus on companies like me and others to communicate what is out there. I like to say we need to look at the future, not through the rearview mirror. And that's what NASA did before Musk came on board. They were looking at the future through the rearview mirror, and that's the wrong way to go. So our reactors is vintage tech from the 50s. Now, we've done a great job. Entergy has done a great job in getting as much out of that reactor design, and you have two different types of reactors here in this state. But we've done a great job, but there's only so much squeezed from that turnip, and also do it in a way that's economic when the tech is so old. We need to bring in new tech, not only new tech, just common sense. Representative Ogeron was talking about molten salt reactors. We pioneered this, invented it in the 50s, and it's still considered advanced because our industry has been so risk averse. We have just been holding on to the light water reactor tech for decades. Again, we need to get out of this risk averse environment that's overly regulated, and with a regulator that had just safety and security in mind. Well, if you do a perfect job safety security, that means if you never have a nuclear reactor, you still have succeeded in your mission. That can't be the success. The success is support the safe and secure access to nuclear. So again, I'm here because it is a new day, and we've got states with not only voices, but in a position to really take the lead for the next generation of energy sectors, including nuclear. And I've been to probably 5 state capitals speaking to legislatures in the past 6 months. It is a remarkable thing that is happening where the states are starting to, I think, rightfully take more of their autonomy back and not just, look to Washington and the very risk-averse regulators to sort of give signals, if you will.
And so I would assume what you're saying is a lot of it deals with perception and some of the issues in terms of as reducing risk or risk averse and implementing nuclear. But things are changing. And again, I think it's interesting. And if you look at the either deaths or impacts associated with the development of energy, and by far carbon-associated energy production has more of a greater impact in terms of the health impact and deaths associated than anything close to nuclear. And the perceptions are changing. And I think you referenced or you've read the Pew report in August of 24 and you said it, that a majority of the Americans now support nuclear energy. Right. And I want to see if you want to wade into this one. Part of the report indicated that men favor it 77% and women only 44%. Could you explain why that is?
No, I'm not an expert in the two different gender perspectives, but I will say that we need to keep it simple, stupid. The KISS principle is important for me. Growing up in Metairie, they don't suffer fools lightly. And coming in and not talking straight and putting the facts out there, hiding the ball, expecting states and communities to say, bring nuclear in, but don't expect the companies that want to bring it in to have a solution completely, including the back end. for the recycling. It's a no-brainer. Even the outgoing Secretary of Energy said privately multiple times, it is a no-brainer. Why aren't we recycling now? It's a no-brainer. We can do it. Let's do it, and let's get on with it. And suddenly, you don't have to have these Machiavellian choices and have the material sitting there forever when it's highly valuable, a great driver for jobs and economy, and you reduce your liability at the same time.
Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Zerang. Representative Razer for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you speak on the geological formation for the storage? And if it's interim and if it's long-term, what are the formations, required formations for that?
So the interim storage does not require geologic disposal, only the final disposition, whatever volume it is. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Nuclear Waste Policy Act says that once you decide to permanently dispose of it, whether it's non-recycled and is 100% of that material that's sitting, let's say, at a river bend, or if you recycle it and you only have about 3 to 4% left, when you decide to permanently dispose of it as opposed to, let's say, 100-year interim storage, that's when the geologic formations come in. Whether it's rock, whether it's granite, whether it's Yucca Mountain, I do recall that salt was also being studied years ago, including Louisiana, as a potential medium that could be disposed of if you're not going to have retrievable storage. And then you just let it encase in itself in a deep formation. I think it's too soon for us to say what the best geologic disposal is, but if you're only talking 3 to 4%, maybe you can even go 15,000.
I guess though, if we're having this discussion, I'm a huge proponent. I mean, this is the future and this is the way to go. But certainly we need to have a discussion. The feds hold us up forever if you don't have a long-term geological formation. I feel like they'll have this. So there's just nothing right now. I mean, they don't have any. They're not having discussions like on other storages where
there were studies already done. Then they down selected to the geology in Nevada and Yucca Mountain, and Congress has not changed the law right now, and it still says the permanent disposal of that waste will go to Yucca Mountain. Okay. I think it's inevitable they're going to have to change it. I can tell you that there's leadership on both sides in the House and Senate in Washington, D.C. They're strong advocates for nuclear recycling. So whether or not it's Yucca Mountain for that last remaining 3-4%, or whether it's or whether somehow Yucca Mountain happens for the unrecycled, where you would need probably 3 or more Yucca Mountains, I don't think that's the way to go. I think we should recycle that material, and then at the end of the day, our options are so far beyond needing a $200 billion Yucca Mountain for 3% that can go into 4 or 8 boreholes.
Yeah, just don't want to see anything get held up if you're not asking the question. If it comes to that, I'd hate to see us be where it's all moving forward. The president spoke on the behalf, but it does. I think we need to try to look at that and encourage to be able to see what the requirements are, that we don't run into a time gap where we're going with it or what the requirements are. I appreciate you answering.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I would just reinforce that I think it's very important to have a comprehensive plan, bottom line.
And I think this is the end game, which is what do you do when you get there? And so that would be, the end game's important.
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
Thank you, Representative Razer. Representative Mack for a question.
Just real quick, thank you, Mr. Chair.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your presentation. So nuclear power plants today, or nuclear facilities today, what specifically do they do with their waste today?
They store it on site.
They store it on site.
And yes, and most of them are maybe 25-foot cylindrical concrete with steel reinforced structures. At first, they put it in the pool. After that 5 years I had mentioned where it's running a reactor, they pull it out, then they put it immediately in the pool so it can cool off. And after a number of years, 4 years or so, maybe less. They pull it out, and then they put it in what's called dry cask storage systems on pad, just on the surface, right next to the reactor. So most of the time it's that configuration, and it's pulled out, and it's been sitting there waiting legally for the U.S. government, the Department of Energy, to retrieve that. And that's what was supposed to have started in 1997, and that is what's triggered the lawsuits by the utilities to recoup the taxpayers' money that they were taxed for. It's called 1 mil per kilowatt hour. Any resident drawing electricity from a nuclear power plant was taxed. And so that was taxed in order to pay for a Yucca Mountain and for the Department of Energy to retrieve that material. I ran the programs that were nowhere near, anywhere close to picking up that material. We're offering a solution to that. But I think the federal government is eminently more capable if they're only dealing with 3 to 4% of that material, and it's much better for the taxpayer. But we will see. But right now it's sitting on the pads in over 30 states, almost 40 states, and 80-plus locations. You even have some that have now, the reactors have long shut down, and the only thing left at the site is a fence line, security fence line, with the used nuclear fuel in those casks.
Yeah, it sounds like it's good for the environment. It sounds like it's going to be a profitable business. Sounds like it's a win-win for everybody. What specifically is preventing you and your company from being able to construct some of these facilities?
Right now, nothing is
Federal
preventing
regulations,
us.
state regulations?
Well, we have a path right now to do everything but that 3-4% permanent geologic siting for a license. Everything else, we can cut contracts. We already have agreements with utilities. And first step is we're doing a feasibility study of looking at an optimal way for our new cycle facility to recycle fuel at certain reactors, because every reactor is a little bit different, the fuel, like a fingerprint. So we want to look at the what we call a high burn-up, low burn-up nature of the used nuclear fuel. But at the end of the day, we can carry out most of our business now without any legal changes to federal law. There's a lot of siting that goes in for state and local. There's a lot of approvals. So what is in front of us, again, I don't think it's preventing, but there's a lot to get through justly, too, properly, whether it's the regulators have an incredibly important role, and I have the pleasure of sitting next to the chairman of one of those incredible public safety commissions, and I think the world of what he is doing and what the commission's doing, especially with the Lance report that was done, very thoughtful, looking at what all would need to be done for expanded nuclear in this state in a way that's in the best interest of the residents. So we feel confident that we have a lane to go. But again, back to points earlier, it's really important, public communication, letting the residents know what the plans are, what it's all about. This is not your grandfather's reactor. These are a state-of-the-art, environmentally much more friendly, economically robust, jobs 60 years. So I've gone to many communities, whether it's in West Virginia, Southwest Virginia, others, and when I have spoken to them about what we're doing, most of them get it, and most of them like it, because we're putting it all out there, and we're not just trying to get them to accept part of it without a solution for the back end.
Last question. Earlier you said you could transport this material by water, rail, or truck.
Yeah.
So I guess it doesn't limit you where you can build your facility. You can pretty much build it anywhere if you can truck it or if you can rail it in or wherever.
Right. Now, some can be more efficient than others, so you look at the cost and the timeline.
Cheaper to go by water and then rail and then truck.
Water is usually most efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Appreciate your time. Thank you
My
very
pleasure.
much. Can I get a copy of the presentation?
Absolutely. This slide deck is available to all of you. So
Thank you.
Be our pleasure.
Thank you, Representative Mack. Mr. McGinnis, thank you very much for this presentation. If you would be able to hang around, there may be other questions that come up as we hear from other agencies.
Absolutely.
And,
It'd be my pleasure. I'll be around later today, through the day.
Okay, great. I do, in closing, and as you wrap up, just real quick, you mentioned earlier in your presentation how you meet with the community and you inform the neighbors and the.
Yes.
Do you have? Can you walk through that just real quick? Like, what are the steps that you do? Do you have town hall meetings? Do you contact the legislature of that state? I mean, what is the process by which you get that information out so that you can get buy-in from the community?
Generally, our company, of course, there's so many ways of approaching that, but in general, our preferred path is to first engage with the legislature and the governor's office, and to see if there is alignment with our plans and the state's plans, and vice versa. And after we have a certain amount of engagement, not too long, and when it's time to, let's say, start thinking about where this could be cited, once there's a full understanding by the legislature and the governor and the cabinet, when it's at the point where you want to start looking just generally at locations in the state, that's when our preferred path has been that we go down and meet with the parish, heads of the parish, mayors, community groups, starting with the leadership, and with legislative reps, with the governor's rep, all together. And I think the communities have really appreciated it when they were able to engage with the company, representatives from the legislature, and the governor's office. I think that gives them, in our experience, much more confidence that they're being engaged and given an opportunity to give input. So that has been the start. We have not gotten to the point where we have down selected on locations, but I've been to Wise County in West Virginia, or Wise County and Southwest Virginia, Mingo County in West Virginia, met with miners, met with mayors and communities who love the idea of accessing nuclear with the recycling trades-based workforce. But it has been a very successful model when you engage with the communities early on and you bring the key stakeholders in, so they don't have to say, well, what does the state legislature think, or at least, some representatives from their parish, for example, or what does the governor's office think? So, that's the approach that has worked for us thus far.
Thank you very much. It sounds like a great model, and it's definitely helpful to get the buy-in early. So
Yes.
again, we thank you very much for being here, and if you would hang around, there may be some follow-up questions.
My pleasure.
So,
Thank you. Thank you again for your time, and thanks for your leadership on this issue.